I was at my best friend's house and I found this book. It is The Tales of Mystery and Imagination by Edgar Allan Poe. And so I stole it. They have no idea. And I thought it would be interesting if I covered the stories in here because I am a writer. I have this very vivid memory. I studied Edgar Allan Poe for the first time in the 7th grade. And I already knew by then that I wanted to be an author. And I learned about his life. And I remember reading that and I was like, fuck, I'm not sad enough to be a famous writer. I need to be sad. I'm not gonna make it if I'm not sad. Okay, A Descent Into The Maelstrom. So this story was published in the early 1840s. It's published in the early 1840s. I would call it like a realistic fiction. You have this seemingly old man, we'll get to that, and then the narrator. The narrator is never named, then the seemingly old man, I don't remember him being named either, so if he was, sorry. They're walking alongside a cliff off the Norwegian coast, so the North Sea, and it's July. And if you don't know, Maelstrom is just derived from Dutch. It just means whirlpool. And so they're just having a conversation about Maelstroms because, you know, I love to talk about deathly disasters that could wipe me out while I'm standing right by the ocean. I mean, like, what else are you going to talk about, you know? And so the old man reveals he's actually not an old man, but the stress from a near-death incident he had turned his hair gray in one day. He decides to tell our narrator the story about him and his brothers, his 2 brothers. So 3 dudes. They go out fishing and they got sucked into a whirlpool. They got caught in a hurricane, and then the hurricane threw them even further out than they already were because they were going further out to get the fish. In this maelstrom, they're in this whirlpool, and one of the brothers jumps off the boat. He dies. The other brother does nothing. He also dies. So you're like, what is our old chap gonna do? But we know he got out because he's telling the story. And so he avoids getting sucked in by observing the rate at which different objects were sucked into the bottom of the whirlpool. So he's observing specifically like the shapes and the size of these objects. So what goes down the fastest, what's bobbing back up to the top. And so he sees that the cylinders, things that are like a cylinder shape, those are sinking the lowest. So he grabs a water barrel, crawls inside of it, and jumps off the boat. And by riding this barrel, he's lifted to the surface and, you know, just escapes the whirlpool. And he's just floating in the middle of the ocean. And these other fishermen happen to pull up. And they save him from being alone in the ocean. And he's telling the fishermen this story, and they're like, that's cap. That didn't fucking happen. Okay, let's talk about the parallel of push and pull. So the brothers pull away in different ways. They're both pulling away from the maelstrom. So the first brother that jumped out of the boat, he's trying to swim away. Imagine being stupid enough to think that you're stronger than the fucking ocean. Yeah, no wonder that bitch died. Then the other brother was pulling away from the whirlpool by fucking doing nothing. He was like, oh, like, maybe if I pretend it's not happening, then it's not happening. Then I'll just survive. Which, that's so funny because so many people do that. They'll just be like, maybe if I pretend this isn't happening, it'll go away. So that's what the second brother did. He died. What I got from that is the harder you pull, the harder it is to escape. Second idea I got from that is you don't need to fight all the time. People think that they have to like fucking fight all the time. You know, like that guy that jumped off the boat and tried to swim against the force of the ocean? Men. You know what? Of course all these characters are men. A woman wouldn't do that. I'm just kidding. That was a joke. Women can be stupid too. Women can be anything. And then you can't run away from your problems, which is another way that like people like pull away. And I think pretending things don't exist, I think that is like mentally a way of running away. The harder you pull, the greater your force is, the greater the fight is going to be, when actually maybe there didn't need to be any kind of fight. Maybe you just needed to look at the problem from a different angle. Our brains are wired to kind of have us like shut down and then go on this adrenaline high when we feel uncomfortable or when we feel unsafe, and then that can really cloud your judgment. And it can make you do something that maybe isn't very smart, but you're so like tied up in your like primal human instinct to survive that you can't really listen to your brain. And so I think instinct is good for letting you know what's up. But if you don't calm down and listen to your brain, you are so fucked. And I have this quote written down from this story. I became possessed with the keenest curiosity about the world itself. ... By ... I mean that there are other words. There's another sentence in that quote that I'm not including. And my principal grief was that I should never be able to tell my old companions on shore the mysteries I should see. I want to talk about is people and their relationships to control. So, and I think in a situation like this, you know, like a natural disaster, you have to have this realization of can and can't. What can I realistically do and what can I not do? And that comes with understanding there are situations that you cannot control, but there may be factors within that situation that you can manipulate in your favor. And from there, you can assess, is it necessary to take control right now? Do I take it? And that is not a question to take lightly, because sometimes the best thing to do is shut up and listen. And sometimes the best thing to do is to take control. And I think that's a really powerful message of the old man in the story, is that he didn't make a decision right away. He sat and he waited. And everybody is in such a rush all the time. This man was facing death. This man was about to die, and he still wasn't in a rush. Why are you in a rush? A factor of control is finding what your resources are. You know, so you realize, okay, I can manipulate these factors, I can take control, these are my resources. Then let that humble you. With humbling yourself, you need to abandon your delusion. You know, like the brother that jumped off the boat and tried to swim against the ocean. He did not have any can and can't realization. He did not understand that he never seemed to grasp the concept that he can't control the ocean. He didn't assess the factors of what can and can't be manipulated. He didn't evaluate his resources. And then he didn't humble himself that he was just a little guy in a giant fucking ocean. And so I also wrote this quote down. So this is not a quote from the story. This is a quote that I found online, but I think it tied into this, into this section that I was talking about. I thought it tied in quite nicely. What's her name? Ellen McLaughlin. It's definitely not pronounced McLaughlin. It's spelled like McLaughlin with an L. Ellen McLaughlin. McLaughlin? I think it was McLaughlin. Okay, here's the quote. "The more you head into the maelstrom, the more valuable you are, of course. but it's what you owe to whatever gift you have. Kind of like how I break that down is you become vulnerable when you realize that you're the weaker one. That is a vulnerability, especially then going and admitting that to yourself and then saying, okay, this is the situation I'm in. What do I do? And then I think that's the part where you owe it to the gift. Hello. My name is Eris Spade. If you've seen me on other spaces on the internet, you might know me by a different name, but as a writer and feature author, I am Eris Spade, and this is Eris on the Shelf. Thank you so much for being here. So, little intermission. This is just a thing I do where I talk about the book that I'm writing. A lot of the themes in A Descent Into The Maelstrom is pretty similar to the first chapter of my book. So this is the second episode of my podcast. And on my first episode, I talked about the prologue of my book. So in this one, I will be talking about the first chapter. The first chapter is important because you're establishing the normal life of your main character before they're thrown into their call to action or their adventure or their conflict is introduced or whatever the fuck they're doing. And so you want to establish the normalcy, but what's their problem that gives them an edge? And not only what is your protagonist's problem, but how can we individualize that problem and take it to where it's worse for that specific character than it might be for everybody else. You don't always have to introduce it in chapter 1, but you can. And so with my main character, Anita, her grapple with control is of her own mind. This story is a paranormal thriller, and so she is grappling for control of her own mind against a demon. And in chapter 1, this demon is not introduced yet, but we're already seeing that in chapter 1, she already doesn't have a good hold on herself already. So by time this demon comes in, the problem that she already had is worse. Now that this demon has come in, that she already feels like she's losing her grip, and then something else comes in and tries to grip her. And so in chapter 1, I'm introducing that conflict. I'm gonna read my favorite quote that I wrote from chapter 1. Bear in mind, the quotes that I share on here are first draft quotes, so they are subject to change. By the time it gets to print, it might look a little bit different, but this is what I got for now. The train bashed into her chest, taking her under it. Her ankle snapped and folded, her back cemented to the surface below her. Bones grinded to dust. She turned her head. The rest of her body detached, gushing under the train wheels. Man versus nature. And the first thing I thought about was like Mother Nature's rage striking back. I know it's very interesting to bring like a feminine rage theme into a story that has no women in it. Whenever I see like stories about, there's a natural disaster or a natural event that is wiping people out, I can't help but think about Mother Nature's rage and how, how much of her planet have we wiped out? Like, of course she's angry with us. When we personify something of the earth that's technically not living, is it meant for Mother Nature to be speaking through that personified thing? And I think too this can go for plants as well, because plants are obviously alive, but because they cannot communicate with humans in a way that we understand. They won't be treated or looked upon as living things. And I think it's very interesting when non-verbal living things or non-living things that are part of the earth and part of the environment are striking back. And I can't help but always think that it's on behalf of Earth's mother because of everything that we've stolen from her. I have a quote written down. This one is from the story. This is a long one, so stick with me. I have already described the unnatural curiosity which has taken place of my original terrors. It appears to grow upon me as I drew nearer and nearer to my dreadful doom. I now began to watch with a strange interest. ... I must have been delirious, for I even sought amusement, speculation upon the relative velocity of their several descents. That being, end quote. That being, he's like talking about these objects that are falling into the whirlpool. But that quote, then also the story itself, get your notebooks out. This is math class. I came up with this little equation, but terror plus wonder equals beauty. And that's something I thought about when he was, watching this like monstrous whirlpool. It's like destroying everything, but he couldn't help but be so hypnotized and amused by it. And I think that can translate to a lot of things. Like, say there's like a giant wildfire and it's destroying everything. It's like, it's terrifying, but that bright light and the way it's growing, there's something beautiful about it. Or, when a tsunami is like raging through a town, terrifying, but there's something beautiful in which that water, it just flows and it covers everything and it takes. And strangely enough, because, fire's not living, water is not living, it doesn't feel evil. It just feels like a cycle of the earth. And then with terror and wonder, I also have written down that dying is not scary, but yes, it is. If you talk to people that have had near-death experiences or people that have died and then came back, they will often say that it was very peaceful. And there's kind of a terrifying element after the fact when you're like, oh shit, I died. But when it happened, it was so peaceful and there was something quite beautiful about it. At what point do we separate from nature as our own entity? And the reason I say that is because the plants, the trees, the water, the fire, human beings, we all came from the same place. We came from the earth. Human beings are evolved space rocks. Space rocks smashed into each other, built the earth, and then eventually things began to live and become alive on this earth, and then it evolved to a point where that became us. That evolution became human beings. And so there is, a lot of themes of Mother Nature striking back and human beings destroying the earth. And so at what point do we differ from where we came from? Because people will say that nature is this beautiful sacred thing, and then humans are, these evil creatures destroying it. But these evil creatures, we are the nature. So at what point did we separate and become different from it and strike back and begin to hate it and begin to trash it? At what point did we turn our back from where we came from? And it wasn't even like something that we had a relationship with, because the earth does not communicate in the way that humans communicate. And technically, without communication, you can't really interact with something. Not in the way that you can't interact with the earth in the way that a human being would interact with another human being. And so there really is no kind of like falling out that a human could have with the earth. But still, we got to a point where we declared ourselves different from it and started stealing from it. It became a self-defense cycle. So, you know, like, think like humans and animals, or even within humans, think of war. I have to get them before they get me. And I think that can tie into the Mother Nature kind of thing too. You know, this guy is like, oh, I gotta fight the brother that tried to fight the fucking ocean. You know, he's like swimming out against the ocean. He's like, oh, I gotta strike back. I gotta make a decision first. I gotta do this, or it's going to get me. And I think, you know, both sides having that thought, that's what pushes the momentum forward of the fighting, in this like self-defense cycle, which is really just people evolving to a point of, oh, I'm gonna get them, I'm gonna win, I'm gonna triumph, I'm gonna conquer. Which maybe it started as self-defense of like, oh, if I own all this, if I have this, if I have all these material things, then I'm on top, and then no one can get me. It's perceived as striking first so that you don't get struck. But maybe if no one was striking at all, then that mentality wouldn't have developed at all. We have another equation that I've written down into my notes. Ignorance plus negligence equals the perception of striking first. So it's kind of like, think of the saying, people are afraid of what they don't understand. And when people listen to their fear, they listen to that instinctual fear instead of flicking it off for a second and spending some time in their brain, spending some time doing critical thinking. They're going to be like, I gotta fight, I gotta win, I gotta conquer, I have to strike first. Now, the very last subsection that I wanted to speak on was stress and trauma on aging. And so that was the part where this seemingly old man was like, psych, I'm not old, I'm just traumatized. It's something that's done, stress and trauma, it's something that's done to you. And not only is it done to you, but you still have to pay the price. And oftentimes that price will be time. I wrote another verses in my notes. So we have the time built into us. So, you know, we cook for about like 80 to 90 years, give or take. I'd say that's the average. I'm not looking it up. So we got the time built into us versus the time we hand over to stress and trauma. While it's happening to you, you know, you do what you can. And if you are lucky enough to get out of that situation, there is a point where you have to make a decision. Am I going to take control? Am I going to take my life back? Am I going to rehabilitate myself? Are you going to hand over more time, or are you going to heal? And I think that too, when you don't heal, when you don't rehabilitate, that weakening, the weakening of your body is pushing down on your internal clock. Then on that internal clock that is suffering, it is paid for with our bodies, because those signs of aging will be taken out on our bodies. And when I say taken out on our bodies, I don't want you to think so much of our looks or our beauty, but more so in our ability to do things. That gets taken away. So, you know, you can't walk up the stairs, you can't run, you can't lift things. Those are the real consequences that, you know, it debilitates your movement. I think that's the real sacrifice, not so much what you look like. And I think what you look like can be insightful to what's going on in your body, but I think looks are a tool to assess, and it's evaluated improperly in our society, but you didn't need me to tell you that. There's a bunch of videos on the internet to tell you that. So the quote that I have written down also from the story for this section: I dragged my watch from its fob. It was not going, ... It had run down at 7 o'clock. We were behind the time of slack, and the whirl of the Strom was in full fury. So what happened here at this part in the story, so the old man has finished telling his story, so we're back on the cliffside with the narrator, and his clock, his watch clock stopped working, and they lost track of the time, and now there's another whirlpool coming at the cliff below them. And I just thought it was interesting that, this whole thing about, stress and trauma on aging, stress and trauma stealing time, and they're talking about this traumatic event, then they lose track of time, their watch stops. And Mr. Poe did that on purpose. Mr. Poe said, I am a poet. I put the Poe in poet, bitch.